So we have, we're going to spend most of today debriefing the trip. And we have a little, going to have it broken down into 3 parts. One is a little reflection experience we want you to do. Then we want to do a debrief of the interviews that happened, and then a debrief of the inventory work you did. And then we're going to do kind of 2 discussions. One, a discussion about population-based approaches to economic development, and then another kind of setting up for the work that we have to do next. Right. So those are the kind of 5 steps we hope to get through today.
Yeah. And if we don't get through all of them, we'll continue next session. I think we have enough time next session to sort of complete this work and cover the material for the next session too. So.
I need a tester. Amy, can you do me a favor? Can you just test that and see if it will actually stick on that board? No. Yeah. You will?
If you push real hard.
Huh?
If you push real hard.
If you push hard, it'll stick. Okay, good. Okay. So, can people just take like a few of these, like 6 or 7 or so of those, then pass them around? So take a set and then pass them around, and then we have supportive tape in case we need it. And also, you might want to get out a piece of paper. Everybody got a stack? Everyone have a stack? Good. James, you have a stack?
I don't have a stack.
Oh. Good. I got a stack. Paul, want some?
Sure. Only one color?
Oh, there's more color. Would you like green instead? Green color you want. Great. Okay, so there are 2 parts to this, and I want people to kind of concentrate on for the next like 5 minutes or so. And that's why I asked you to actually have a piece of paper out and then also have one of these. The piece of paper you won't have to share with us, but these we're going to put out. What I'd like you to do is just take a few minutes and write down, from your perspective, kind of 5 observations that you thought were the most important observations you made during your trip in Springfield. Just things you observed, saw, or things that happened. Okay? And it can be from any perspective. It could be something, it may not be related to economic development. It could just be related to relationships, whatever it is. But try to think of, from your own perspective, just 5 really kind of key impressions, things you came back from in terms of your visit to the North End. Okay? And then after you get those 5 down, I'm going to ask you to do one other thing. Okay? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that.
Right.
One per sheet, please.
One per sheet on the big ones?
Yeah, 1 per sheet on these. People finished? Almost finished? Oh, thanks. Yeah, just right next to it. Okay, so after you've done that, then in your own notebook or another piece of paper, I want you to write one more thing. Given your whole experience there, given your experience that in the North End, I want you to just kind of think back to any other experiences or events or places you know of that when you were there, it reminded you of. It's kind of like, wow, when I was walking around, this experience or this event or this thing kind of popped up in my mind. It could be something you actually lived through or something you maybe have read about, but there was a connection with something outside of the North End. Is that clear? What I mean? And just jot yourself a note down about what that was. Don't put it on, no, just totally independent of those things. It doesn't have anything, it doesn't have to have anything to do with those cards. Okay. Is everybody ready? So, what I'm looking for at this point in time is volunteers. Person to come up and just tell us quickly about the 5 things that you have, that you laid out. And what I'd like you to do is, when you do it, if the thing you saw was positive, you thought it was a positive thing, experience, it's all subjective, put it on this board. If it's something that you thought was negative, put it on this board. Okay? Yeah! It always...
What if you do it just as an observation?
Okay. You know what?
Not value neutral.
Just not one or the other.
It's kind of like mixed bag.
Oh, mixed bag. Okay, yeah. Or could go on both.
Okay. Neutral gets the biggest board, only because that's not a suggestion about where you place things.
Neutral and mixed bag.
Yeah, mixed bag.
This is neutral mixed bag?
No, one side is neutral, one side is mixed bag.
Oh, okay. Mixed bag. Okay. You want to give us a little sign? Write us one that says mixed bag and one that says neutral. And then we'll make this one over here positive. Okay? Just to remind everyone. You got a mixed bag?
Neutral.
Neutral? Okay, here's neutral. And give us a mixed bag. So who wants to go first? Okay, this is like a graduate class. We don't have to point people out, right? Okay.
I can.
Okay, let's go. Come on up and put your things. In case they don't stick, just grab a piece of tape to put them up there, okay?
Okay. The first thing was very strong sociocultural infrastructure.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't.
A strong sociocultural infrastructure. Underutilized parks and open spaces, which are here, I guess, because
Is it positive?
like the positive thing is there, but you're not.
Okay.
So it could be a mixed bag.
Could be a mixed bag.
Okay.
Self-select.
You guys would be helpful.
And,
We could vote in them.
Yeah.
and diversity in housing stock with the stronger presence of public housing and society.
And you can put it where you think it's wrong.
Okay. And this is here. Yeah, we got this.
That's okay. It's,
And stronger presence of medical industry. Which is also here. And cerebral riverside.
What was that last one?
The riverside, the wall on the riverside. What wall?
that big wall that goes.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, okay, that's fine. We're just going to go through these.
Okay.
Who's in next? Just jump up. You know, don't raise your hand. Just jump up and do it. You know, seize the moment.
Okay. For my first one, I have that Springfield shows some, as a city, shows some economic dynamism and represents potential demand for the work and services of the people in the North End. Another positive that I had is that the people in Neon are ready to work on this, ready to be pretty active. One neutral observation is that I found it seems that a lot of the small local businesses are very, like, almost intentionally, or at least knowingly, volatile contingency plans, where the owner knows in advance there's a high chance it'll close quickly and is not actually trying necessarily or intending to make it last a long time. As a mixed bag, I have give and take between the community and Bay State Medical. So while there's a positive that I think Bay State is willing to come to the table with people there, I'm not sure that anyone's operating with a very coherent game plan of what the community wants from Bay State. Another mixed bag in a way is that it sounds negative the way I wrote it because I wrote language gap, but I think it's a mixed bag also because it shows some internal unity, cultural unity. And then another positive was that the North End has been identified by the state as an anchor neighborhood, so it shows that the state is ready maybe to pony up to the area.
Mine are both. So I'm going to put this one in positive because I think it really was a bit intimidating. I said we received a very warm welcome in the North End, but I think that it was still intimidating because it seemed like symptomatic of expectations of us. This is definitely a mixed bag. As I said, we seem to have joined the conversation concerning the future of the North End at a very advanced stage. This is, I think, positive, but could be considered a mixed bag too. Neon workers are deeply concerned about environmental and public health in the North End. The last two are, I would say, more negative. I felt that Jeff had a really sort of impenetrable set of thoughts about what the ideal relationship between the North End and Bay State was, and I really couldn't get much of a handle of the way he thought about that relationship as it might move forward, or does it not move forward. He sort of talked about, but wouldn't get into the details about severing Brightwood from Bay State. So I feel that till that black box is somehow cracked open, it's negative. And then I thought the highway interchange was very dangerous.
Oh, which one?
The highway interchange, the road.
I have a few negative comments. But first, I found a wide range of community activities going on in the area. So I saw a lot of drug addict assistance programs and alcohol assistance.
Could you just speak up just a little louder? I'm having a hard time hearing.
And there was an absence of cross-community initiatives, although I saw a lot of activities going on within the community. I asked several people, and it didn't seem like there were a lot going on with other communities. So that's. And then somebody told me that the health issue was a serious concern, that they have the highest industrial pollutants in the area. Okay, this is everything. And then I thought there was not enough internal demand within the community. Like, I didn't see that there was like an excess demand for the existing supply. So,
Can I ask you a question about it real quick? When you say not enough demand, you mean like commercial for services or
yeah, for services and
commercial?
goods, for business. But then also, I think Seth mentioned that too, that I saw a strong sense of unity among the people because they speak the same language, because they're the minority majority. And I think that's a positive.
Do you mean they speak the same language?
Oh, they speak, most of them speak Spanish, and I guess it is a minority language in the country, but in the area, that's what the majority speak. So I thought it kind of creates a sense of unity among the people. Because there's a minority, but there's a majority.
Go next. Okay, let's see here. The first I have here is that the north end didn't seem to be too poor to me.
That's interesting.
I mean that's compared to maybe another city that I've been to, Philadelphia during the summer. I thought Philadelphia was poorer than the north end. Anyway, I don't know where that goes. But yeah, put in the positive side. Then two things actually on NEOM. One of them was I was a little bit concerned about the financial sustainability of NEOM over a long period of time. And I thought that was a little bit of concern. So I don't know where to put that, but I think it's a little bit neutral. Just some concerns I have. Then also I had there appeared to be a small number of people compared to the size of the city. I mean, the city seemed to be too big and too few people, you know. So in a way, you might say that the city's capacity was greater than, you know, the available resource use or whatever. So, Shiben, you are very good at quantifying these things. So I don't know. Then another concern I had was I had a concern about the technical capacity of the NEOM staff beyond providing social services. I mean, like I kept thinking, if we were to come up with any other project beyond social services, how would it be implemented? And in my mind, there was this question about whether the people I saw and talked with, you know, had the technical capacity. So that it's negative. And my last observation was that, I mean, like Shiben, I think Jeff had a very strong opinion about bringing the Bay State employees out into the community. And he kept saying that over and over. I said, this is the plan I have, you know. So I felt a little bit uncomfortable with that.
That's a positive.
Is that positive?
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
The first thing I write down with echoing Bill is it doesn't look that poor. It just comes the same way I expected it. I'll just put that as neutral because looks can be deceiving. And another thing is drugs. Like nobody that I spoke to talked directly about it, but there's a methadone clinic. There's such huge rates of incarceration. You can kind of tell that there's something with drugs going on that I think people are really talking about. The next one is the scary highway overpass, too. Because I was very traumatized walking through it. And next, everybody knows everybody. People pick up each other's kids without asking. Like, people are just really kind of community. You can can tell that just when you walk in stores and everything, everybody. Part of it is because we're walking around with Myra, who's there, but everybody. And also, women seem to run a lot of the day-to-day community activities, like just like in the shops, a lot of shopkeepers can be women and all people in neon and stuff like that. So maybe that could be positive, but also in control, not to be.
Can you say that one again?
Oh, like women tend to run. There just seem to be a lot of like women tend to have like a really positive, strong role in the community. Like just walking around, like even a lot of people who work at stores are tend to be women and stuff like that, like storage.
The first thing that I thought was really important was that they seemed very interested in what we have to say, but I'm going to put it in. Another thing, I guess maybe that there is some state involvement that they're not talking about, but it seemed like they weren't really engaging with the state at all. So that seemed negative. And in the same way, they seem to not really be connecting with the rest of the city, either on social or political levels. There's some negative. I mean, maybe it's neutral.
It's positive.
And young people seem very interested in making the most of the infrastructure that they're part of, so meaning whatever that thing was called, the school and all those community rooms. But that seemed like that could be positive or negative, because maybe that's not really the way to go. So mixed bag. And finally, I felt like they were very hopeful for the future of the community. That's
First, I have that the staff at Neon is very committed and knowledgeable and capable, and that came out very positive, but I meant it actually more as a mixed bag. Because, I mean, I think I was, that was my first impression, but then after coming back thinking about it more, that's can be a dangerous thing, especially when they're our client and we're working for them.
what? Can you explain?
Yeah, I'm trying to find what the negative,
well, just because there's a danger that we completely accept their perceptions of things, that they give us only one side of it, just like Jeff in the Bay State, and I think that can be dangerous. Second, there was a vibrancy to the school area that really seemed to be there even when the children weren't there, so it was easy to see it when we got out of school and there was like everyone running around, but even when we were there before, the whole complex was not nearly as bad as I pictured it to be, so I thought that was a good thing. The change in Main Street was really drastic throughout the city, and I think that's also a mixed bag. I don't think Main Street needs or should necessarily be one continuous corridor throughout the whole city. And different parts of it can have different strengths and character. But at the same time, it was not necessarily like a thriving kind of like retail or commercial area in the North End, at least. There was a lot of vacant developable land in the North End. Also, I think a mixed bag. I mean, I think at present, it's not the best thing for the community, but that means a lot of opportunity for us. And several people describe a change, the Brightwood Development Corporation, like the change in their presence in the community. And I still don't fully understand the story. It seems like there was kind of a lot of politics around that. But I think just the whole Brightwood Development Corporation presence might be a negative.
Okay, positive. The midday sort of community vitality that we saw on the streets when we got there, at night it was kind of calm, the morning was kind of calm, and like midday there were people walking around. It was like very positive energy. A negative, the condition of the elementary school and the flooding made me very nervous. I wasn't really comfortable with sort of, it's definitely an asset and they've done a lot with it, but as far as how it might be used in any plans they make, it's just something that we should sort of keep in mind that the uses are there. So What else? Mixed bag. Majority of the neon folks that I interacted with were women, which I think, sort of self-importantly is great. But at the same time, it's not just one community, so it's something that I think is a mixed bag. Positive strength of all the relationships that I saw, familial, professional, and just sort of general community. And a negative, last one, the palpable, well, maybe mixed bag. The difference in the feel between the Brightwood and the Memorial Square size. And sort of as we try to figure out what to do, it's possible that we decide to sort of have ideas of things that will maintain that difference, because it's not something that we really can tackle, or, I don't know, it could be an aspect or
Go ahead.
I have lots of vacant buildings and lots. I'm going to put that as a negative, although John classified it as a mixed bag, but I think now it's kind of negative. Kind of used a fancy planning word, but I call it the dominance of automobility between neighborhoods, so that's scary overpass, which is a negative in my planning perspective. I have Bay State's suburban campus versus the neighborhood's urban grid, which I guess is, but it's just kind of a disconnect, and then kind of similar. I felt similarly that Anna did about the different neighborhoods as well. The positive is the deep roots of neon in the neighborhood. And then my final one is, which I'm going to put as a mixed bag, is the resilience of the underground school. I think there's something just weird about having a school underground, and that it's flooded, yet people are committed to it. But it also kind of buries vitality underground in a way. But that's something I think we need to discuss and tackle.
So mine are kind of experiences. I've been there so many times. But actually, one new one for me was when we left the Harena School and walked up Main Street under the highway into the complex area where Bay State is, and just the difference of walking from one side of that overpass to the other side, and what was there. And for me, it's a negative, because it's really about things just not connecting. This is just always the truth. It's really the kind of warmth with which people greet everyone, and us, and folks that they don't know. The scary bridge experience, walking across from Memorial Square to Brightwood at the top of the highway, in single file, like the little ducklings, and that was very scary. I also thought the lack of variety in the kinds of small businesses. They were either grocery stores or restaurants, and that was basically it. And that didn't seem very viable to me. I think that's 5. Oh, this one is, and the number of I was actually very surprised by the number of boarded up houses from fire. That was actually quite a change from the last time I had walked through the neighborhood. So, it was last spring. Actually, was it last spring? Well, it was in January. So that's not really spring, that's winter, isn't it? Yeah. Spring semester.
About 8 months ago, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just to follow that through, how much do you feel it? Quantify that, what would you?
It seemed double, at least, just.
Was it in one particular area more than others?
Yeah, in the Memorial Square area.
I thought that the scale of the vacant industrial buildings, they were quite large, some in pretty bad shape, clearly some serious brownfield issues. So that was going to be, and I thought it, while they weren't at the center of the neighborhood, they certainly, had a strong impact. And then another negative, the limited knowledge of businesses and residents, at least among the outreach worker on our tour. I was I was really surprised how little he seemed to know about, you know, who were these businesses, who did they employ, where did people work, and I sort of fear it's kind of emblematic of the lack of relationships between some of the organizations and the business community, although I don't really know that. I think on a positive side, I was actually quite surprised by the level and diversity of economic activity in the neighborhood when you really add everything up with Bay State, with the small-scale retail. There's even some distributors there. You have all those transportation businesses, and then you have industry. You know, it was quite diverse, and probably if you counted up all those jobs, you know, there's probably you know, a number of jobs that may equal or exceed, you know, the workforce that's in the neighborhood. I think probably the thing that impressed me the most was the accomplishments of NEON and the Brightwood Health Center in bringing back about some of the systematic change in the healthcare, bringing, you know, getting the uninsurance rate cut in half, you know, changing the model in which healthcare was delivered, getting better healthcare for the prison population. That clearly shows some creative thinking and some significant capacity to get things done. And this, I'll say, is sort of neutral. The contrast between the two parts of the neighborhood, I mean, it was even after reading about it, they really felt like two different worlds. They're sort of very, and maybe it was because of the time of day, but this very, very quiet residential neighborhood with not many people out, not much traffic, and then Memorial Square, you know, with all that traffic and activity and everything.
So, overall thoughts, impressions after kind of hearing everyone report out? Any commonalities? What's the story you would take from what you just heard?
I thought a lot of the positive comments have something to do with the human aspect, kind of. Like a lot of people made positive observations about the human network that existed in the area, while a lot of the negative comments had more to do with the physical infrastructures, or I don't know if economic activities are part of the physical infrastructures, but how the physical setting was present.
What do people think about that? It's an observation.
I think that's good.
Anything else? Others?
Let me ask us, last week we talked a little about how people were feeling about the sort of charge we've been given by NEON before they went out there. And I'm curious, now that you've been out in the neighborhood and have actually seen it and met the people and have, you know, a richer sense of you know, the client and the community, how does that change your thinking about the project and your sort of optimism or pessimism about it?
I was the only one last week who said anything pessimistic or explicitly pessimistic. But I felt a lot more positive after having been there. I was really, I guess, kind of skeptical about what they expected from us in terms of whether they were really excited about being involved. And I guess I didn't really realize that they had sought us out and that there was kind of this long relationship. So I don't know. I think that just their being excited about working with us makes me excited about working with them.
I'm still really positive, but especially with all of these colorful post-its up, I have no idea how we will accomplish anything by the end of this term. Which I said earlier as well. I think that I felt very, and I think that I know I felt very strongly about all the potential for what we as a group could do, you know, crafting an economic development plan once we got there and walked around with a sense of what sort of facilities and businesses and industries exist in the community. But then every time a Neon worker would talk about any of those businesses or facilities or talk about their ideas of what was, you know, what an economic development plan consisted of, it was quite worrisome because it seems almost like one of our biggest obstacles is going to be our client. And it sort of reminds me of this, at the time, what seemed like a really weird question that Tuscan had thrown on our gateway take-home final, which is like, what do you do if the community group you work for doesn't want you to do what you think you should be doing in their best interest? I would like look up the code of ethics to answer that question as well. Which at the time I thought was like a really terrible exercise, but geez, humble by.
Actually, I don't want to dwell on one topic too much, but there was an anecdote I was thinking of that dovetails with what both Shivan and Anna were saying, which is that at lunch, the kind of questions we were getting were making me wonder, how free we were to give any plan that we felt appropriate. Or, granted, we're probably free to say anything, but it made me wonder how receptive the clients would be to anything, because we sat down and it seemed like the first thing out of anyone's mouth was, so what do we do about all the vacant houses here? And that just immediately seemed to narrow the whole discourse that we were participating in about economic development in our project there. And then there were a series of other very specific questions. So I'm uncertain as to whether or not, even though there's a lot of community capacity, I think, to do grassroots and do good work, I just wonder if there is a trust or a level of openness for the partners to want to really act on plans that a variety of plans that we might potentially provide them.
I didn't have that negative impression about what we could do, given that they have a specific agenda. It definitely makes sense that getting basically employees into town moves efficient housing and all of that. But I don't know. I feel like I think that we can benefit from their prior experiences with OIT students because they seem to at least ostensibly really pleased with the work that they've done. And I feel confident in us that we can drive an agenda if we think that there's a different one than they're putting out there. I think I was really impressed with them. I didn't hear Jeff as much as any of these other people because we came in late to the lunch. But there's this dominant personality aspect. But I don't feel like just because they're our client that we can't push the envelope with them and kind of put forth what we think is important.
So listening to this, I'm curious if people's thinking about what the nature of your work is, at least over the next few weeks, is different now than it might have been last week. Are there things that seem to be more of a priority for us in how we tackle this, based upon either what you saw there or some of the client relationship issues people have talked about? Anything say, wow, this, I wasn't really thinking that we had to do this, but we better make sure we understand this, or we better make sure we learn about this. Did any sort of epiphanies like that happen, or any reflection lead you to think something's more important than something else in what we tackle or how we think about the work?
I don't think this is necessarily specific to this project, but I think it's just real important that we have, as soon as possible, or that we have some sort of big agenda or concept of what we're doing, and just really run by them and have them, and have them not just be Jeff or not just be one person there, but have it be different people, different members of the different organizations and this community. Just as soon as possible, early on, kind of have a back and forth.
I don't know what our agenda was previously. I don't think that we have to be completely shaky after Friday, but I do feel that there might be communication problems later on, and I worry about whether the client will continue to work with us, but at some sort of deeper level just feel that this isn't really going in the direction that we thought it would. We just sort of wait it out and hope that a different group shows up in a year's time. I
One of the things that keeps popping up for me, and I think it was very well kind of illustrated both through the visit and through some previous visits we've had, and that is that this kind of language of and kind of thinking about economic development is not something that's just, as a planful thing. It's not something just that the community doesn't have experience in, but it's also not kind of the language of politics and economic development in the city as a whole, right? So there's this really interesting problem, I think, when someone steps up and says, well, we think we need to do this. Then the question is, a set of people who have a set of skills about helping to do that is, how much of your work is about coming up with a plan, and how much of it is about helping the client really understand what does it mean to try to do economic development work, and what role do you have in kind of the development of their thinking, and does that become a strategic part of what does it mean to actually create a plan? Do you have the responsibility of creating the context where they can be receptive to it, as opposed to assuming that, well, it's about getting the right plan of which they'll be accepted to, but that somehow there's a responsibility or there's a need, a requirement to really kind of help them in their own thinking, in the development of their thinking, so that they can be in the position to really kind of grapple with the plan in the ways in which you think it would be most helpful to them.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think it picks up on John. I definitely left with the sense that, there's really a lot more discussion and back and forth communication, I think, involved in figuring out what our work should be than us going off and coming back in October. And I think October is probably too late in some ways for us to be in a discussion about what we see our task. But I think Caesar's point's really an excellent one, is that I think, what is the learning process, and how do we think about framing and conceptualizing what we're going to be doing in a way that's developmental for them, that helps them understand why we're talking about things in certain ways, why we see these things as either why we endorse some of their ideas, or if we are proposing different sort of ideas, what is the thinking behind that? I think that's sort of the sort of deeper communication of why we arrived at what we are, and having that challenge somewhat, and having people take ownership and of that is going to be, I think important. Because I think there is a big certainly disconnect in terms of the work people are doing in the community now, the type of relationships they have, and what at least typical economic development work sort of entails. So I think there's a lot of potential disconnect if we just move ahead without engaging in that type of discussion.
Three working simultaneously, because I cannot see them having ownership role unless they see some change going on, and then they will be more receptive for what the change might cost to them. So I'm just wondering, is it possible to have something changed while still dealing with them, convincing them, and during the learning process?
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting idea. I know I've definitely worked on projects where you try and identify a project people can start working on early, so that you sort of break down the sort of thinking between you do a plan and then you begin to implement the plan. And that's something we might want to keep in mind if we see something like that. I mean, I think that's a huge challenge, for the class in the period we have, to both do a piece of planning work and sort of get a project going that will bring about change. But I do think that's an issue we should be asking ourselves. are there ways we can begin to move forward on action without necessarily having completed a plan? And that might involve how we engage with NEON and campus committee members and actually undertaking the research or having the discussions or participating in the meetings we have in developing the plan. I mean, that might be one way. We use the work we're doing to facilitate some relationship building. If we're going to be meeting with people in the business community, inviting a NEON worker or inviting someone from the community to attend, so that I mean, I think there are things we can do in the way we do the work that will contribute to that somewhat. And we may find by October we have some ideas on some project, and we really want to begin working with them and implement it. And I think we should be very open to that approach, if it emerges.
Yes, I heard that the majority of the people in this community are Latino, is that what it is?
You're predominantly Puerto Rican.
And I don't know what kind of, if those people were born here, or if that's a second generation here, or do you know?
Mostly second generation, third generation. They've been a pretty stable community.
What kind of lifestyle the first generation had, I think, has a lot to do, because a lot of times people just don't have the vision of what it is that you're going to see after that. I mean, we can come and see and say, well, this neighborhood needs some work. But some of those people is, this is good. It used to be worse in situations like that. So sometimes a different vision. So sometimes helping compare what this could be, see the past and see the future, what it is right now and what it could be. It helps people take more initiative of where they want to go next. We live in a neighborhood, we work in a neighborhood where before there was absolutely, all the stores was closed and was very much like that. When the Brazilians came, they started opening their stores, and of course they had no business plan. They had no idea. As the demand will come, they will start to do. And if they see that this business was working, then everybody else will go to the same business. Like right now, we have 15 head reps, not including the people that's doing this in the houses. So now the people who had invested about $5,000, $50,000, or open up their business, it's in a huge drop now. Once all this development started to happen, the people who owns the business say, oh, this is great. Everybody we have business, this looks good. Now I can do another development on top of this. So now they're going to invest about $65 to $70,000 million. And then all those businesses that's there, so now is catered only the Brazilian community. But this new development is only going to be not Brazilian, it's going to be there because the rent's going to be so high. So in less than 20 years, I mean, we would say for the last 5-10 years, something really good happened of helping them open their own business, but they didn't have a plan of how is this going to, what is this going, what kind of impact this is going to be now, and what is going to be 5, 10 years, or 20 years from now. Because for some of those businesses, in order for them to make of what they had already invested, they need to be in business at least for 5 years. So some of those businesses are not going to make for the next 5 years. So helping people to think about it, what the plan in long term, it could be very beneficial for this. Because in this particular community, the majority could lose the business on the next 5 years.
So that connects a lot with what you saw when you were talking to one of the business. Can you say a little bit about that story you had when you talked with the guy about the store?
Yeah, I was walking with Bill and we stopped in one of the little local bodegas, and I asked the owner about just about his business and its history, and because there was a for sale sign on it, and we were curious as to why the business was for sale. And he said, well, I started it 3 years ago, and after a year or so sold it, and then bought it back, and now I'm selling it again. And it's like, really? Well, why, what did you do when you didn't own it? And he said, well, I have this other store and it's much bigger than this one. And what came through in the conversation eventually was that he sort of bases himself on the one big store that he owns, and that's like his foundation, his entrepreneurial foundation, I guess. And then this store, when he feels like he has the money and it's like a good time, or I don't know all of the conditions that decide this for him, but he buys this other store and runs it and just sells little foods and things there. The other business is larger appliances, I think, or at least includes them. And but then when things get tight, he sells the smaller business because he needs the fast cash and goes back and runs only the bigger one. And he seemed perfectly comfortable with moving in and out of that, and there wasn't like any big scheme to, there wasn't any, it didn't seem to be like part of some larger plan. It was just, well, sometimes I own this store when I can afford it, and sometimes I don't when things get a little rough, and he moves in and out of that.
That's interesting.
Another issue that sort of came to mind is we had a
trained as well as this morning that conversations with the state or with city officials might also produce some pretty interesting conversations in that class. Or at least if the center has information on if such previous conversations took place between Neon or Blackwood Community Health Center, the state agency of some kind.
We have not a lot that would really impact on this. I'm actually going to just show you. Oops. I want a computer.
Recalling some of the things that Jeff said, it sounds like they've actually a very impressive relationship with the state.
with some elements of the state.
They've been involved with service delivery for highly specialized programs that they've done with exceeding amounts of efficiency. So obviously there are some departments within the state apparatus that they have been very successful in working with. There's that portent for economic development. I feel that those are, at least if we were to have those conversations, or at least avenues in which we could point the client to and say, look, we've actually been really successful around a whole set of economic development activities, or potentially a set of activities that have some economic development impact.
Yeah, or another way to look at that, which I've been thinking about, is they've clearly accomplished a lot. And they clearly have some real organizational strengths. And to what extent, and that's sort of this question of how do we take this, how do we perhaps apply this population-based approach? In other words, what are their strengths, and how could that inform the approach we take? If we realize, if our first step forward in any sort of economic development initiative is going to be built around the campus committee organizations, then we have, trying to understand how they approach their work, think about their work, how we might be able to translate that approach into economic development work, so that we can sort of build on their own capacities, their own relationships, their own way of doing things. We may have more success in getting the work accepted and getting the work forward, and that's one approach. I mean, and I think it's worth exploring that. On the other hand, you might come to the feeling that that's just too big a disconnect. That's not going to, the tasks they need to do are so different that we really have to approach the work in a different way. And I think that you might come to that conclusion as well. But I think it's a good question to ask: where are they starting from, and how do we engage with them, and where they're starting from in terms of thinking about an economic development plan. But I would generally think of setting aside some time to have a broader set of discussions fairly soon is going to be important to that work, both within the community and within, quote, other stakeholders in the city, the region, the state. Because I think it's going to be hard to feel like we have a good understanding of the opportunities for the community and where resources might be. and why things may have worked or not worked in the past. So that's probably one activity we should be thinking about tackling.
I have been looking at my computer because I know I got an email from Jeff yesterday and I couldn't remember exactly what it said, but part of it was basically that, we need to make sure the students get to talk to Katie and to Carlos and to Steve at Bay State and stuff like that. So I think in some sense he's recognizing also the need to make sure there's a broader audience. One part about this, I just want to kind of affirm what Carlos said, is in thinking about this as you're kind of, being the firm or organization that's saying, has been asked to do this work for this community, is I think it's really important that you're clear about what you need in order to be successful, and that you can kind of communicate that to folks. And right now, you have the attention of a few people who are part of the campus committee, and I think being able to say, this is the access we need, this is people we need to talk to, this is time commitment we need, these are the things we kind of need in order to be able to do what we're trying to do. It's a reasonable thing for you to communicate back to the group. That it doesn't have to be kind of a passive thing that you only have to deal with what's presented. But I think folks need to know, what you require in order to be successful, and that I think they will help you do that if they kind of know what it is and we're very clear about it. So it's a communication challenge I think you have with the campus committee and with this work group that I think you need to establish really kind of early on how to do that. And I think we're moving to a place where Carl and I don't want to be the interveners in that process, but having you really be the negotiators around that process.
I think one of our goals for this week, including today and tomorrow, on Thursday, is to begin to sort of figure out how we want to tackle the work and how we're going to organize ourselves around it, at least over the first phase. So that will hopefully empower everyone to go out and begin to take the initiative around contact with Neon, and et cetera.
I guess I have a question. I guess it wasn't for you, Caesar. Could you talk a little bit about how, I know you've been involved in this community through CRCM? Yeah. For a few years now. That's like another acronym, I don't even know. And I guess I'm curious how the student products have been used by this group in the past. Have they been, realizing they've been completely different types of tasks, but the product itself has been viewed as actionable by the recipients, or more like education piece, or how would you describe?
Well, let me take the last course on the campus concept we did. That one of the things that was very clear, and that the community asked for, and the class went back and forth with them one round, is that the community was very clear that they wanted actionable items on the plan. They wanted things that they could do within the next 6 to 12 months, as well as a broader plan that fit into. And there were a number of recommendations, actually, that the class worked on that they thought could be accomplished in the next 6 to 12 months, of which I think most of them the community has acted on. I'll give you 3 examples. It used to be that there was a campus committee, and then there was a steering committee that ran Neon, and Neon was actually separate from the campus committee. And one of the things that came out of this is the group said, look, Neon needs to be responsive. Response needs to be a subset of the campus committee, not a separate thing. And actually the director of Neon needs to be hired by the campus committee and be responsible to the campus committee. And so they actually changed that organizational arrangement. They also talked about the need to hire someone who was going to be a coordinator for the campus itself, which Vanessa, I think some of you met Vanessa. They actually then put money into hiring her to do that. There were a set of other activities that they thought could happen and some changes in the building that could happen. So when Peter took us on the tour, and you remember the room, he said there the playscape was in, that actually was a classroom last year. And it was suggested that that room be cleared out and actually be made as a central space for the community to do certain kinds of activity. So the school acted on that. And the idea was that the school release all the space on that floor for community activities and none of it for educational activities from the school, as a way of setting the base for then some of the other things they wanted to do. So there were a number of steps that I think then people felt like, oh, well, we can act on those things. We can make that happen. And they then kind of went on and started to do that. So I think in the way they work is that they really do need clear next steps. And it doesn't matter how big or how small they are. And that they need to be connected to something much larger. Now, I can tell you one of the problems we had last year, which I think is a clear communication problem. You remember the entrance into the school, the park? Okay? A very funny thing happened last year. The class got together and they were trying to work on this much larger issue of how do you create, let's see if I have it here. I'm not sure I do, so I may not have to hold anything up. Yeah, actually I can use this one. Can you hold this up for me? So they were worried, the class last year was worried about this. Here's the Harena school, right? And they were worried about this flow. And they were worried about how do you open up this school concept so that it really feels like it's an inviting place coming in. Because you remember when you come down off the highway and you're there, even now the park, it does, it's a park and you can't even, unless you know there's a school there, you would never know, right? Unless somebody told you. So, one of the things that the class worked on was the design of that space so that it would actually be an extension of Main Street, right? And they had a whole idea about both how push carts could be used, how that one apartment building that's there could actually, you could turn the first floor into a business space and keep apartments above it, a whole kind of set of things like that. Unbeknownst to the class, after several meetings with people, the community actually had a plan that, you can put that down, that had been developed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that had been kind of sitting in a back room somewhere about redeveloping that park. Okay? Now, what you see now is actually the actualization of that plan, not the one the students did, right, of the old plan, because it had been on a track, but nobody talked about it. They would put it up and say, they did show the plan and say, well, we had these ideas. But nobody was saying, well, we've got something going where this actually may happen.
It's actually in the Parks Department's budget.
And they're starting to do something. Right. So the students are working on this plan and stuff, and then when they came to one meeting with the New North Citizens Council, and they're laying out the concept of all of this, and they had a whole set about what was going to happen on the Brightwood side. And there was basically a little battle that happened because the person who was head of the New York Citizen Council at that time, Barbara Rivera, felt like, well, she had been dismissed because they had an idea. And though it was never communicated to the class as something they were, and I don't think this was because people were trying to set up the class. I think it's because people didn't hold the information that way. They just didn't hold it that way. There was this. And I think the other problem that they got caught up in is the person who set all that in motion, Katie, who's now the economic development person who was a senior planner, was out on maternity leave that whole semester. So and the other person who was head of the planning department, who we would normally work with, was actually out on sick leave because she had cancer. So the normal people who would have provided that information weren't in the picture. There was no one in the picture who could do that connection for the class. And I think the class, what's interesting about it though, in the public meetings that they had, in the meeting with the campus committee, folks wanted to do the plan that the students, they thought that made sense. And it could have been very easy for the students to have said, well, what's the transition from what you have and what's going to happen to this next stage? And they could have built it as a transitional plan. as opposed to, well, this is what you need to do next to clean up this area. But there wasn't even that piece. So there is some.
I think it's an important point. It's often, the politics of getting plans accepted and acted on, understanding what people are already invested in and sort of acknowledging, at least acknowledging that and perhaps even incorporating that, can be very important because, a lot of people will read the plan for where they're in it and how it influences resources for them and their organization. So, you have to sort of be conscious of that. But I do think in terms of action that, it's pretty much a given where our client is now that thinking about how they organize themselves to do economic development work and what sort of capacity and relationships they're going to need to act on, whatever we work with them to decide is their economic development agenda is going to be, I think, a big part of what we're going to have to thinking about and doing. And so I think that's something once again to be thinking about as we begin to collect information. What's important to help us plan the sort of capacity building, the organization capacity building sort of aspect of what we're going to need to do. Because there is, I guess, to the extent Brightwood Development Corporation is doing something, and to the extent that maybe the Hispanic Chamber is doing something, that there doesn't really seem to be much capacity. Even something that I was sort of surprised when I asked about was, well, what's been done around employment programs so that the jobs at Bates State, they're just beginning to do something around that. And that you'd think that would have been something that the employment and training, the schools, the employment and training programs and people in the city, in the neighborhood would have been thinking about and working on. So I do think that's something, we should recognize is going to be important part of the actions.
So it's 11. Should we
Yeah.
take a quick break?
Sure. Yeah, why don't we take a quick break, then we can come back and report out a little bit on the interviews and data collection.
Okay. And also, I would like if somebody would take responsibility for typing up those notes for the class under each of the categories, and you can figure that out.
Deeper appreciation for some of those procedural things outside healthcare. I understand the definition of healthcare is very broad.
Well, why don't we just pay attention to this question for a second, because I think it's an interesting one, because I can give you a little more detail about that particular experience. The person that they had worked a lot with last year was Michael Denny, who's not part of NEON. He's actually with the New North Citizens Council, is now an executive director. He had been part of all of the meetings with the students when they came back and reported and looked at stuff and everything like this. And he had been part of that whole process, and I think one of the things that came up was, one of the questions that, I guess the point I'm trying to make by that is that I don't think it's NEON that really is the issue here, because I think you're right. There are certain things that the NEON workers are involved in and not involved in. But even when you're involved with a broader set of players in the community who kind of know some things and have a hold of some things, there's a question of, how do people communicate what's real versus what is desired? And sometimes those things get mixed up, and they were hard, I think, for the students to really kind of make their way through. I also think it's really true that no one in the community holds this economic development perspective, and no one holds a more, even though the New York Citizens Council has it in their purview, there is really no agency that really holds the kind of planning process for the neighborhood. It does fall under the New North Citizens Council, but if you kind of then think about the size of their budget and what the majority of their work is, it's not around that, right? It's around something else. And so I think there is a little bit of a gulf between where people can put their attention. And I think actually the folks who interviewed Jeff got some of that. in the interview. I mean, not Jeff, but I mean Michael got some of that in the interview. I think he was very frank in the interview about some of those things. So,
as I recall, I certainly wasn't involved in last year's classes, but in some of the discussions you had, I remember the process began with a little bit of a conflict in agenda, wasn't there? The New North Citizen Council had been pushing this idea of a community center.
Yes.
And the idea of a campus connecting all of the other organizations was somewhat controversial. So there were some divisions.
There were some divisions
in the community, even when the project started. And I don't know if that played into how open some people might have been or not been, with the community. But they did walk into a situation where there were some conflicting agendas if I were to be going forward. And so I think at least have your antennas up for that. There might be segments of the community that think an economic development plan isn't what people should be working on now. They might feel dealing with vacant housing is much more of an important issue or something like that. So, you should be attentive to where there might be conflicts or divisions around the agenda you're working on.
Why don't we do some debriefing around the interviews that people had, and who got to interview whom, and tell us about your interview and what you learned and what you think is important for us to know. And are there any of the teams here? Let me see, who was interviewed? Jeff was interviewed? Robert Bailey was interviewed, I guess, or he spoke. I'm not sure which one that was. He wasn't interviewed. Michael was interviewed. Michael, Denny, Jeff. Anyone else? Peter Lamont was interviewed. So those are the 3 interviews? Cool. So why don't we start with Peter? Who did Peter?
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
Actually, I get this fast. I try to summarize something. I hope. I think he's a principal for the school. Sorry.
Phil, did I give you my notes?
Yeah, you did.
Yes, he's the principal for the school.
Yeah, I didn't really organize in any particular fashion. I just kind of type up what I thought were the issues and just sort of wrote bullet points,
Is there an extra one around? Are we all?
Okay.
Should we share? Okay. And we can share. We're fine.
Yeah, so in the beginning, one of the first thing he talked about was just his connection with the community. And he said that he's been working there since 1967 as a community activist. And he used to be the director for community services. Before becoming principal, he was a number 2 man for education, I believe, in Springfield. I'm not sure of that, but I think that's what I heard. And then he has been principal for 4 years. There was no specific order to our sort of interview. We just went around, looking at issues that came up in our conversation. So one of the big things he talked about in the beginning was this issue of housing. And it was very clear from the very beginning that housing was his biggest concern in the beginning. He talked about housing for the elderly as well. And he did say that from the bridal side of things, the housing stock was pretty much stable and okay, but that he felt that some of the housing on the Memorial Square side needed some attention. In fact, he did talk about some of those areas being completely cleared out and new housing being put in there. And then we talk a little bit about the school and the environment there. Basically 3 elementary schools and 1 middle school in the area, and most high schools are in the downtown area. The school in particular is mostly Hispanic and that group also has the highest dropout rate. He did say that there were 92% free lunch introduced in the school. He talked about how the school had made some progress in the last couple of years. For example, they used to place 2 from the bottom, a couple of years ago, and now they're like 16 in math and 18 in English in Massachusetts. So, just a couple of curious points. He talked about African Americans doing well in MCAS as compared to other groups there. He talks about how there were limited English proficiency among students. And then he also talked a lot about the partnership the school had with Smith College, which provide after-school tutoring and sports for the kids. And then a couple of issues on the demographic. Basically, he talked about from the 1950s, how the area was settled by recruits from Puerto Rico for the tobacco farms. And then the North End being the poorest community in the area, but at the same time serve as a gateway into the region. He talked a lot about how pollution has taken place a lot in the area that has led to a high incidence of asthma. We talk about new influx of immigrants from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Dominican Republic, in addition to the more traditional Puerto Rican in the community. And one important thing he said was that, in a question, I think it was James who asked the question or something like that, concerning the political environment, and he did say that there was a control board composed of 5 members, and that 3 of those members were government appointees, and they're particularly conservative.
State government. State appointed.
Yeah. I didn't quite understand all of that, but maybe you guys do anyway. And he also talked about the neighborhood drawing a lot of churches and clinics. On the health side, the issues included HIV, diabetes, asthma, and obesity. From the employment side, we talked mainly about Bay State, but he did mention that there was no concerted effort by the community to push for job creation. And then migrant workers, of course, work on farms along the Connecticut River. In terms of families, you talk about how the need for some kind of stabilization for families, and he saw that as basically coming from the economic foundation, people getting jobs and having income to support their families. Talk a lot about broken families and how basically you had a situation where kids were raising kids. And lastly, just in terms of...
If I can just add one thing to that, he talked a lot about adult literacy as well, and trying to get that. Kids having kids how can the kids based on the idea that how can the kids really grow and learn if their parents don't have the capacity to help teach them. So the kind of teaching in the home thing. So I think I don't know if it's current or if it's a recent initiative, but to do adult literacy in not only English but also in Spanish.
Actually, I have some of that written down here.
Okay. Sorry.
Where you have challenges, opportunities, plans. Peter thinks that business is the way to go. He is very strong on that. He believes there are lots of entrepreneurs in the area. For example, we talk about artists, massage parlors or barbers, even though most are illegal, restaurants, hair salons, body shops.
Gotcha. So when that statement, Peter thinks business is the way to go.
Yeah,
it's that's helping people form businesses is really
right.
Should be a priority for any economic development plan. Is that sort of what you mean?
Yeah. And then also you talk a little bit about this whole idea of business incubation. I think you also talk about during the lunchtime, selecting or designating a place in the school for that. So he talked about that. And he felt that this whole idea would really be appealing to the 3 government appointees on this board, that it would be really one way of getting them involved in the community. In terms of, one challenge he talked about was just the homeschool connection. How do you connect the school to the home? And some of the issues that Jim just talked about. How to engage the community. And some ideas he had was to provide rural health care for students. He estimated that about 90% of the students needed oral health care. And he also had his idea of opening the dental clinic for elderly people in the evening hours at the school. And then some other ideas included providing English and Spanish literacy classes for parents. His idea was get a group of parents, train them, and these parents then would be responsible to teach other parents. And then he also talked about plans to research into how to deliver literacy classes for families. And this would be, I guess, done by the Smith College. His idea on New Enough was that they're very powerful, and they get very good response. He talked about state rep living in a neighborhood, and there was a very good connection to the mayor, and there was also funding for social services. So,
I just wanted to go back to one thing real quick. Do people understand what it means under the school thing when it says 92% free lunch? Is that clear to everyone what that actually means?
No.
In order to qualify for kids to get free lunch at the school, they have to come from a family that lives within a certain percentage of the poverty level set by the federal government. So this is actually a measure of poverty of school kids who are in school that are actually living.
It doesn't necessarily represent everyone in the community, because some people might be sending their kids to private schools or other schools, but it's certainly an indicator. Anyone else at the interview want to add anything? Eddie or James? Can I also, do people understand the financial control board situation? Don't need any more clarification on that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just my big kind of global takeaway was that it was really, Peter's obviously has really deep roots in the community, has been in positions, I think, even at lunchtime he kind of said, oh yeah, I headed up the redevelopment, authority, and that didn't come out in our interview at all. And then, he was talking about how, he was in a construction, had like with the school and really building the school. So I think he feels personally responsible, for a lot of the stuff that goes on. But he really did focus on the small businesses and this entrepreneurship, micro enterprises, the kind of way to go in the neighborhood. So that was really his very clear agenda.
You're going to ask a question?
Yeah, I have a question about absentee landlords. Did he say who are these and where are they?
I know he did talk a little bit about people living, I think, in Boston or something, owning properties there or something like that. Yeah.
But, I interviewed Michael Denny, and he said that a lot of the absentee landlords from Boston or further east just come in about property and
right.
Totally leave.
So is it investment just to buy the property and live there for a few years? Or?
Yeah, how did Michael talk about that? I mean, he did talk about that specifically, about what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like you can get, it's some of the cheapest property you can get in Massachusetts, and you can buy a house for $100 or under $100,000, and they're just buying it. They're just completely letting the housing deteriorate, and there was like lots of turnover, along with people into the housing not well maintained at all, and it's just been a huge problem.
I mean, there's probably a lot of money pouring out of Boston, because if you look at the situation in Boston right now, there's been this huge run-up in property values, and there's a disjunction between the value the properties sell for, and the rents that properties are earning. You can't really support a unit based on the rents right now, because properties have gone up. So you may well see property owners saying, if I take my money out of Boston, I'm going to make a lot of money on this investment now, and I can move into a market where values are lower and the rents will cash flow better for me. So it doesn't support. It's sort of like arbitrage in the States. You have a very expensive housing market and a lower-cost housing market, and people are shifting some of their investment dollars to capitalize on that. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah.
Great. Good job. Who wants to go next? Okay.
So Seth and I interviewed somebody who used to be head of the New England Citizens Council. He had a lot to say.
Anyone not have a lot to say? That's a problem.
I think our initial question was answered within like 40 minutes. But he was really good. He had just like a real wealth of information. Some of the highlights. Basically, so New North, he really emphasized kind of the social service aspects of what they do, and there was to kind of Caesar's point about how much of a planning organization are they. Like he and actually another worker there, Maria, sat in on some of the interview, and she was showing us their kind of like their scope of work, their missions of work as an organization, and so much of it was social service based. So they do like all sorts of like childcare, parenting issues, family. Tutoring, job placement, advocacy around youth and family issues, healthcare. They do resource and referrals, substance abuse programs, HIV/AIDS prevention, and education, after school programs. Anyway, like if for a good like 10 minutes, you wouldn't know that they actually do planning as well, or do development, or are the main. Kind of yes or no on a lot of development projects in the North End. So that's kind of a big issue, is that there's all this other activities going on within the organization. So as I think we kind of described previously, I'm not completely clear, but the mechanism is that they do have any new development goes through them, so they have pretty much, if not an official, but they have a de facto decision-making role in development that happens in the North End. So we're definitely a key player, and they have the city's ear when it comes to new projects. Talked a lot about, again, like absentee landlords and housing, and how that's a big problem. But again, it showed like the disparity between Memorial Square and Brightwood, and how like the housing stock in Memorial Square is not nearly what Brightwood's is. And he said he lives in Brightwood. Yeah, he lives in Brightwood. He's been there for he said several years, like 20 years or something. And he just stressed, a totally different place than Memorial Square. Interestingly, New North is actually one of the largest employers in the North End. I don't know what we do with that, but they are.
How many did you say?
No. Yeah. A couple of like successes he pointed out that they've done. One that was interesting, but they turned a liquor store on Main Street into a child care center. That I thought was interesting. So they had done like development issues. He pointed out some of the same ones we've been talking about: limited skills, education, language issues. Kind of like anywhere, sometimes people can be better on subsidies than they can by working, given the type of jobs that are available in North End. Another interesting thing is that if you remember from the initial development reports we read, is that Denny, the tool group was the largest employer in Brightwood. They left, so they're no longer in the North End. So that's a major potential issue, is that this employer is gone. We talked a little bit about crime and safety, crime perception of crime and safety. And he thought that the perception isn't completely matched with reality. He thought that it actually, as a neighborhood, was a lot more safe. It was a lot safer than people maybe make it out to be. Talked a lot about their relationship with Bay State, which is interesting. He said he was really adversarial forever, I guess. But then in the past 2 or 3 years, it's been improving significantly. He thought that I pretty much had to do with change in leadership. And there was something that brought them together. They did. Bay State needed something from New North. I forget what he said. Point being that their relations are improving between New North and Bay State. He debated Bay State is pretty much like interested in land and property and money. not necessarily a good community partner, but again, that's been improving over the past few years. They don't employ locally, which is a big problem. But as you know, it also has to do with the skills don't necessarily exist in the community for the type of jobs that the Bay State is looking for, at least the good type of jobs. So one of the indicators that things are kind of changing is that Bay State is now working with two of the Lincoln and one of the high schools on training programs. So that's one of what we wanted to see continue was linking Bay State up to schools for vocational schools for real type of job training that would prepare North End residents for Bay State type jobs. Oh, this is the issue for Bay State is that they're landlocked. So they don't have any way to expand directly around them, so that they, in this view at least, we're becoming more interested in the neighborhood as a whole to offer them more opportunities for expansion, because they pretty much expanded everywhere they can in their, directly around their existing property. Another interesting thing is that he talks about the Private Development Corporation and how it's changed, and how it really was like a strong CBC in the neighborhood, and now I guess their new leadership, or at some point where existing leadership kind of changed, and they're just completely, not interested in the neighborhood, are not seen as a good community builder. But now their interests are a lot more outside Springfield, so they're doing a lot of development work, either outside the North End or outside Springfield as well, and of course Massachusetts. And it seems like the impression is that they've gotten kind of like too big and are no longer as interested in the North End. So he really stressed that the North End needs a strong CBC, and he was going about this idea that the New North, his organization, could play that role as a developer. And so he was kind of clear about that. Or is there needs to be like a founding of a new CBC, but clearly that was a huge need. A lot more. Briefly. And we asked him just kind of like, if you were put yourself in our shoes, if you're doing an economic development plan, what do you see as the priorities? So, he talked about those kind of bigger issues, but I mean, he when asked that question directly, he said he doesn't really know. But some of the things he pointed out were just, no destination shopping, so nothing's luring people from the outside in. Not even enough convenience shopping, so there's not like drugstores, dry cleaners. It's not like the kind of diversity of convenience that can just focus on bodegas. We asked a bit about that, and he thought, just kind of as we've discussed before, that people kind of don't know what else to do. So they start a local business, and they don't know what other local business starts, so they do a bodega. And that's not necessarily obviously the best thing. He did talk about how there's this opportunity to build around kind of like the ethnic Puerto Rican emphasis of the North End, and he thought that that was an opportunity that might attract people from the outside. That we know about. So that is a marketing packaging issue of branding, like the New North. And again, I think he recognized the potential pitfalls of that, but just saw that that was an opportunity that might distinguish the North End from other parts of Springfield. Also, I think I noticed that Bill had written this, but something that was interesting he noted was that in the past 4 or 5 years, there's been a real influx of immigrants from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Mexico, and that so while the neighborhood is definitely probably Puerto Rican, is that it might be changing, or at least there's kind of new groups coming in, and potentially a lot of them are undocumented immigrants. I guess I'll stop there. I think those are the big things. He mentioned this guy, I don't know if you know, Pedro Gonzalez, who is an example of a successful businessman who I guess he owns or runs several stores in the North End but doesn't give back to the community. So again, just kind of like Bay State, there's all these strong presences, whether they're institutional or individual in the neighborhood, that are not good community, are not good neighbors, basically, and really could do a lot more for the neighborhood.
One of the things I said in on the interview, one of the things I thought was very interesting that Michael said was about this whole thing about working with Bay State and the change in their relationship. And what was fascinating to me is his stance that they don't want anything from Bay State. You know, it was very interesting. They've never really said, we want you to do this. That what they've said is, we want you to recognize us, you know, and then come and present and recognize our authority around some of this planning stuff. But they have not made any demands, really, as a community on Bay State, which I think is kind of interesting.
Any other comments from the other participant?
Well said. I don't know if he disappeared.
Okay. So move on to Jeff. Let's summarize that.
All right. Jeff, what did Jeff have to say? I feel like there were a lot of us there.
There were a lot.
There were a lot of us. So I'll say a couple of things, and I'll invite all of those present that I might leave out. He also started out talking a lot about Denny's history, both at the health clinic and just in the neighborhood. Talking about sort of his political activist nature. What else did he talked about? So we talked a lot about the history. Then he went on to say, I guess we didn't really get a lot of information about the health clinic yourself as far as staffing. I know you even tried to steer the conversation that way a couple of points, and that didn't really pan out. But it does sound like he is very committed to his staff, and so that's an asset. Let's see, it is affiliated officially with Bay State, and has always been, Bay State does not want the clinic to be an independent clinic, although Jeff said that he has for a long time felt that it should be independent, that it would be a better clinic if it were so. He mentioned 36 petitions or something that he filed over the course of 3 years trying to gain independence for this clinic. He said that there were 3, and this is, I guess I wasn't really clear, that Neon is a product of the clinic. This is a program of the clinic. Okay. So there are 2 other programs that he mentioned. One was sort of a new approach to primary care, sort of team-based. Pyramid scheme, it was not pyramid scheme. But, sort of like that sort of organization of medical professionals all working for one individual was one of the other programs I mentioned. The other was correctional health care. So then he went on to talk about, he talked about his history, about the history of the clinic, and then he started talking about sort of what he saw for the North End. And he talked about personal care attendants. That was one of the things he talked about, that being a possible area for both training and then creating a supply of workers, and then he felt there was demand to develop health problems. He also then spent a fair amount of time, we talked similarly about sort of co-op daycare. He then spent a fair amount of time talking about turning the North End, explaining to sort of small business type of topic, turning it into a retail support area for Bay State, for sort of recreational shopping, but as well as serving what he sees to be sort of like catering, food supply type piece of Bay State, that campus. Maybe you guys could check that stuff. He talked about, also brought up the Brightwood Development Corporation, very similar opinions, obstacle wrapping house at this point, we felt.
Although that came up when Robert Bailey joined the conversation.
Oh. Yeah, no, that was interesting.
That was like a whole addendum.
Yeah, that kind of changed.
What happened? Tell us. Some of us weren't there, so why was it interesting?
Well, no, Robert Bailey came in, and I guess it just changed. It became less of an interview, more of just sort of, I wasn't really clear. They were sort of chatting.
He asked, Robin to talk about the land trust idea.
Oh, land trust, right. Art really is, oh, that's right. So right, I might have not brought that up. Art really not want to. I don't know. And then Peter came and started talking about some things, so. Guys, what else did you follow?
He also talked about kind of this idea of, he's part of like this whole, we call it like the community health center movement, which was a whole kind of idea, I guess, getting out of like major hospitals where patients go to the hospital to try like having a community area that's serviced by a clinic that's in the community and is kind of more, the community is kind of on a board and stuff like that. It's like the community kind of runs it in the way through boards and associations and things. And have that kind of, and that kind of movement also has an idea of like population-based healthcare, which is what kind of his clinic and a lot of clinics that are involved in kind of this movement kind of from the 60s are kind of, which is like not looking at, not saying, okay, we have 50 people who came to our clinic and 20 of them got well. It's like looking at like the whole community. So even if you don't see that person in your clinic, that's the clinic's responsibility to bring that person to the clinic and still give care to that person, even if that person isn't on their own come to the clinic. Like looking at the whole community is something. And then Carl brought up, well, like what does that, and this is like something that I've asked him this question because like people at Neon also, I heard this several times and I talked to Myra about like what it was. She stressed again, like a couple of those stressed like that Neon is kind of a population-based organization, has a population-based approach, which is that, they knock on, like the way Myra explained it, is like you knock on the door of every house, it's not, and try to reach everybody. It's not just the person that answers the door, it's like everybody in that house is part of the community and hopefully they can access all of those people to Neon. It's not just people that show up to meetings or come to programs or anything like that. So then Carl asked the question, like, what would that mean for like economic development? So then he kind of talked about maybe what this kind of community-based approach would mean for economic development is looking at maybe things that wouldn't target, like not like a workforce program that would target like a specific group of people that were interested, but things that would make a large change for everybody in the neighborhood. And he kind of talked about this idea that kind of like in most places, like the community, he was talking about where he lived in, like where he grew up in Queens, it was like, there were like 70% of people that were pretty well off and doing okay, and then like 30% of people that were really struggling, and that 70% really helped the 30% that were struggling, so the community was well off. And he said that that's a little bit reversed in the North End. So you have like 70% of people who aren't doing okay, and 30% of people who are doing okay, but that 70% is the massive kind of, that's kind of the big presence of the community. It kind of brings that 30% down, so the whole community isn't doing well. So it's kind of talking about approaches that would maybe change the community kind of like on a larger scale and kind of get it to that 70% of people that were doing okay, so the whole community could kind of benefit from that.
One thing I would add is that one of the population-based approach and the outreach through Neon produced real financial benefits for Bay State because they were able to sign everyone up who was eligible for Medicaid or some other health insurance plan. So they dropped Bay State's uninsured percentage of patients from 16% to 18%, as were all the other community health clinics still have this 16% uninsured. So it sort of did have this benefit for Bay State, and at least, one of his other themes was there's enough money in the healthcare system that if you find ways to save money through actually delivering better healthcare, that does free them up some resources to do some other type of things. So that I thought was kind of interesting. And that they were able to sort of bring about these kind of changes. They sort of were able to sort of change the healthcare delivery system in what seemed to be, overcome a lot of organizational obstacles. He did walk us through this process he used to eventually get the community health centers in the Springfield area to take responsibility for the healthcare of prisoners, so that they weren't, having AIDS, going into prison, stop getting care, and then coming back out with really deteriorated health. So that was also kind of interesting.
I just want to say something on that because I think it's one of the interesting things about the health work that they're doing, because I think often when we look at it, we talk about it and think about it in that, but this is about healthcare and it's about the social service delivery component of things. But there have been some very interesting experimental business ideas, economic ideas, and what they've been doing with healthcare that I think they haven't figured out how to leverage in really powerful ways. So, for example, the Medicaid one that they're doing, if you ask Jeff, if they've been able to recoup an equal amount of the savings for them, as opposed to going to Bay State, they don't feel that they have been able to. The same thing with the insurance. If Bay State gets this savings, what's the benefit for the community? Clearly there's a health benefit, but if there's a financial benefit for Bay State, the community doesn't, they can't monetize, get any value.
Aren't they trying to negotiate some cost-sharing arrangements?
They're trying to negotiate some of that, but don't kind of have it. But I think and then there's a third one. The thing with the prison thing is interesting because part of what they did with their model with the prison is because what's happened is that a lot of the prisons have gone to contracted their health care out to private, and they've been able to show that they can provide the same care, better care, for less money, into this contract service. And there's an interesting, there's a model there. So I just think it's interesting. You have kind of like three different things that have happened around the health thing where they were able to demonstrate that there's some way in which
financial benefits.
Their financial benefits.
They don't capture that cost savings, and so that does raise interest. If they could capture some of that, could that be a revenue stream that could help support, other activities?
Right. It was actually, just as a side note, when Massachusetts Housing Finance Agency, MHFA, when they were MHFA,
they're called Mass Housing.
There was a gentleman called Tony Flaherty who worked for them doing kind of community outreach, and he got very interested in the insurance costs that they had to pay on buildings that they had, and that in places where there were kind of high poverty and issues of drugs and things like that, that the insurance premiums were high. And he actually struck this deal with some of the insurance companies that if he could lower their loss rate, right, would they split with him 50-50, the savings. And they actually ended up building the whole community service program out of MHFA, out of that whole insurance program, which actually became a mainstay of what Mass Housing does now. Which is so there's some ways in which that can happen. So. But you want to move on to this population base?
Yeah, I don't know. Do people want to take a few minutes to talk about the inventory, or do you want to? Maybe it's more of a segue to go into this population-based discussion. Yeah. Okay. So.
Forget about Robert.
Bailey. Okay.
Yeah. You want to name them both?
Yeah, so first was we were walking by the physical site where the statutory meeting is located, and we weren't quite sure which agency it was because it just said Casa Hispana outside, and I actually thought that maybe it was a different agency that was out of the whole North End campus committee and Neon. And Camacho was like, no, we are under their umbrella. Come on, let's go inside. Like, we don't have time. But she sort of dragged us in and then found out really who was having a difficult day. And he gave us about 5 or 10 minutes of his time. And actually was just sort of getting wound up. And really wanted to sort of tell us about all the work that they had been doing and how they had their thumb in every conceivable pie, from sort of youth development to at-risk prevention to caring for seniors. And the interesting thing was that Camacho sort of saw that caring for seniors part as the way in which Neon and the Spanish American Union work together. And there was a little taste of them, Robert Bailey sort of seeing their organization as a kind of hybrid between a community-based organization and the CDC almost. It was trying to do pieces of work that might otherwise traditionally be done under one of those two organization types. And then when he turned up, sort of almost out of unexpectedly at lunch.
Because he told us he wasn't going to have time
Right.
to attend.
And it didn't seem like he'd taken care of the work that, was keeping him away. So I don't think that any of that sort of pressure had really been released. I think he really wanted to talk about the need for a strong CDC in the area, and that he had very specific ideas of what their mandate could be, and how that would support existing organizations. There's a few things about that that I was really struck by. One, and this, again, the taste of this even earlier, his relationship with Jeff seemed really weird, very formal. The only person the whole day and for the previous night who actually called him Dr. Stafford. He seemed really formal around him in general. I don't know what the history there is. And the second one, it was almost like he was vying to make the Spanish American Union into the CDC, which would be interesting, but I mean, if that's our brief, that's a very different brief from everything that we've talked about so far.
He also did kind of introduce himself in an unusual, I thought, in an unusual way, because he emphasized his accounting background. It was kind of like, I've been, I forget, a fiscal administrator or something like that, and I kind of ended up as executive director because everyone else came and went, was almost how he told the story. And I still do the fiscal work, and I really liked the fiscal work. It was an unusual way to introduce yourself.
And he was the interim executive director for a while, and actually later he ended up lunch gave us all business cards and said interim executive director, except somebody had scratched out interim.
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing. I had gone up to him and just to get the business cards, and he, each one he very methodically crossed off the interim. And he also kind of talked me up, and I think he mentioned it a little bit at lunch, the kind of land trust idea. I guess I don't know if they've gotten money for that, but it seemed that what he was emphasizing to me, and maybe this is the role that where Neon comes in, that it's not so much the Spanish American Union that has to do the work of kind of land banking, but that the community itself has to kind of see the value in land trust and really take the reins and move that concept forward. So it seemed kind of like it was a big idea, a lot of work to be done, and he was really kind of looking to spread that work out among the community and using it as a community organizing kind of concept, but I guess it didn't, it seemed like he wasn't necessarily too sure about how to execute that idea.
Very good observations. I'll leave it at that. I think they're very good observations about what's going on. I'm sorry, yours.
What is the Spanish American Union? I was still kind of busy at the end. It's like what? Like it's not like it's not like the New York Citizens Council. It's not like what is it?
It is a social service agency, and it's independent of the New York Citizens Council. The New York Citizens Council actually has a much more, it has kind of an official role around its, because of its elected representative organization and what it does, and it's tied into state government around how it gets funds and stuff like that. Spanish American Union is a very independent organization. It does, on the social service side, does some of the same kinds of things, though it focused very heavily in two areas. One was providing support for elders, and the other was the training and preparation and certification of child care workers from the community. They had a whole program around it. As a matter of fact, they had developed a whole Spanish language program for actually training people to get certified as child care workers under the old director. When the last bust happened in the economy, and there was all the cuts 5 years ago, 4 years ago from the state, I can't remember the dates or anything, but they lost almost all their funding. And so they became like a dormant institution in some sense, kept together by the board only, existing. They weren't really running any programs. And now they're trying to come back. And I think they're searching for what kind of organization they're going to be. And what can they be as an organization that's going to let them sustain themselves.
I mean, I did get the impression that they're very oriented towards state grant funding, and that finding opportunities for state grant funding. You know, he had talked about doing a lot of work now around tobacco prevention, smoking prevention. I think because there was funding available from the settlements with the tobacco industry and stuff like that. So I did get the sense they were sort of in a more opportunistic mode right now based on where they could get funding.
I actually had a question about the tobacco settlement money. It completely spent down.
It's a 20-year, something like a 20-year funding stream.
Because the reason I'm asking about this is that New York State CBOs and CBCs can get the money to sign people up for subsidized health insurance or free health insurance. And that all comes out of the tobacco settlement money.
Yeah, each state's using that money differently.
Okay. No, I can imagine that. But I was wondering if there's any similar stream here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long-term funding stream, but I'm not really sure how in Massachusetts that's being used.
I thought it was kind of ironic that they were doing so much anti-tobacco stuff, because everyone was saying that a lot of the migrant workers in the area work in the tobacco fields.
There's actually,
weird conflict,
it's too bad when we were in the health clinic we didn't meet in the community room, because there's actually a huge display up on the wall they have about the health hazards of tobacco, both working in the tobacco fields, smoking, and everything like that. And yet, as you said, that's where kind of a lot of people work. They actually have a photo of Clinton standing in front of that sign, and Jeff kept saying, I'm going to send him a picture of that, and then the one of him in the official, Cigar Aficionado magazine, where he's smoking cigarettes, and send it to him and remind him.
So anyway, coming back to this issue of population-based approach, I thought it'd be useful to spend a little bit of time sort of talking about whether, whether you think that concept's useful in thinking about our approach to economic development, and if so, what might it suggest about how we might frame our work?
I don't know what it means.
Okay. Well, let me give my interpretation of it. I interpret it to mean that a commitment to improve outcomes for as many people in the community as possible. And that the way that's being implemented is through NEON, and that's through actually trying to develop a relationship with everyone in the community, be able to sort of reach out to every household and understand what their health needs are, understand what services might be available to address those health needs, and sort of connect them up to them. So, I mean, at least two aspects of that seem useful, or at least important. One, the sort of notion that you're really trying to measure outcomes, not just for a small segment, but how everyone's conditions improve. And the idea of having this service delivery model where you actually have relationships with everyone in the community, you really try and have an outreach network that can try and connect. Now, I know you've said in the past that really only about 40% of the people have actually participated in a meaningful way in that, so they're not to 100% at this point.
Yeah, I think there's other couple of things, two ways to think about it. One is that, I mean, you said this quite clear, but it's the kind of indicator of success for them and the indicators for progress are not based on who they serve, but who resides in the community. So it's a very different model, because most people kind of think about, look, if we service as a clinic, for example, 100 people and 80% of them get well, we're doing a good job. But their notion is, because they have this population boost, if we serve 100 people and 80% get well, but there are 300 we're not serving, then we're not doing a good job. So it's a different, you kind of cast a broader net of how you kind of measure what you're paying attention to as an indicator of success. The other part that they talk about is where you put your emphasis on your strategy for doing that. And part of that is an assumption that you need to figure out why the people who are disconnected, and how do you kind of bring them, if you have 300 people who aren't serving, then really trying to understand how do you connect and really bring them into what you're doing with some assumption that you have a way of knowing how to do what you do in a good way. So it works quite well in the medical work because they know how to provide care. And so if they can get people into the system, then they can do a lot for them. But on the economic model, it's a different thing because they don't necessarily have something to get people into. So it may, present a different set of problems. So I think it's much more of a strategy of who you're holding as important to pay attention to, and how you kind of measure, what are the indicators you look for success.
I wonder, I've been thinking about some of this literature on poverty alleviation in the third world, and stories about how scholars found that really successful cases of poverty alleviation were made up of families where different members of the families did very different types of occupation. Some of them managed to get public sector employment, maybe pulled 2 or 3 people into that. Some of them worked in the informal sector, in case like petty vendors. Some even got unorganized light manufacturing jobs, and yet others may have done some subsistence urban agriculture. And I'm wondering if population-based economic development resembles something like that. It's really about finding a menu of things that different members of each household can find their way into.
From the household's perspective, right? What could be a strategy? What could be the set of activities that you're looking at as a household might help bring them out of poverty?
And I'm guessing that it's precisely not just saying that we were able to create 100 jobs for people from the community, and then either because of union membership or because of the nature of that work, we're bringing home $55,000 a year, and that brought those 100 households out of one segregation from poverty lines. But I'm guessing that that's the difference.
Yeah.
But it could be a difference.
It could be a difference, yeah. This is a very different approach.
Right.
Any other thoughts about any? Is this useful? How might it be useful? Or is it really outside the way we should be thinking about economic development?
I guess one of the alternatives is taking a more macro approach. Maybe it's looking, is that kind of saying, like, I guess I'm sort of like looking at the month, because this feels very intuitive while looking through this.
Maybe, yeah.
So I guess I'm wondering, how do you lead this, given that, or maybe given that, like, how do you couple with other types of approaches?
Because it strikes me somewhat interesting because the list of projects that they give us doesn't really connect, at least explicitly, with this sort of population approach. They may have connections in their mind somewhere, but creating a destination for people outside the community, well, where is the connection of that to the improved outcomes to people in the community? Now, there might be a set of assumptions playing out in people's mind about it, or reusing vacant buildings or things like that. Their thinking hasn't started from, okay, what are the challenges to improving incomes of the people we're working with? What are the set of
economic opportunities that might support that. I guess maybe Peter's conception might be closest to that, and then he's looking at the entrepreneurial activity around that. The thing that really struck me about it is that in a lot of the literature about at least obstacles to employment in poor households, and especially households where you have multi-generational poverty and low educational attainment, is that there are very complicated obstacles and myriad obstacles to employment that include language barriers, health barriers, education, childcare, sometimes transportation, and that getting those people in employment and staying in employment and then ultimately moving up to higher level incomes requires a pretty strong involvement with them, and often a complicated mix of services. So it did strike me that, at least in that, some of the same issues they're facing around healthcare in terms of the obstacles of getting people connected to healthcare are probably there on the employment side. And I would imagine even on the small business development side that some of those same issues and obstacles are going to get in the way. So I do think there's some potential analogy, even though the system's very different. There isn't a healthcare delivery system and an insurance system that at least makes it a little easier to know what you're trying to connect people to. There isn't a business development system that you could plug people into, what the same type of employment and training system is. But at least in terms of the barriers to accessing that opportunity, I think there's going to be some analogies to what they've learned on the healthcare side. That's translatable. I think the other thing too is it gives us at least one potential screen to think about as we look at these ideas and these proposals, which is how do we see them actually improving economic outcomes for the residents of the neighborhood? That should be a screen we're thinking about in deciding which activities to focus on. We should be able to make a case about how these activities will generate improved outcomes for people in the community. We should be, or thinking about how our plan will help connect those activities to ways that will lead to improved outcomes for residents. Since that's their overriding objective, I think we need to be applying that lens to what we're thinking about doing.
Yeah, I think, in my mind is, if you take this population base that's very active, you're not doing door knocking. And in the way I'm thinking, maybe it's just another added component. So they have this healthcare or social service kind of component. Now it's kind of like maybe that's the first layer, and then economic development comes on top of that. And so it's connecting, I've talked with some folks that work in kind of career computer centers for CDCs, and they often say, we're going to meet people where they're at. And so it's really kind of taking stock of where someone's at based on their skills, based on their just kind of their emotions and their thinking about themselves and where their opportunities are. And so if it's getting an ESOL program, then it's getting an ESOL program. So I guess it's, and there's a framework, like the self-sufficiency framework. I don't know if people have looked at that, but that's something that's been developed in the state in the workforce development world, that it's really kind of career development is a stepped process, and people go through stages. So it might be useful to kind of apply that to the kind of population base.
Any other comments or observations?